Our scripture reading today is from the Gospel of John, at the time when Jesus was preparing to leave the earthly home and return to the fullness of the spiritual life with God. John 14, 1-4. Jesus said, "Don't get lost in despair. Believe in God and keep on believing in me. My Father's home is designed to accommodate all of you. If there were not room for everyone, I would have told you that. I am going to make arrangements for your arrival. I will be there to greet you personally and welcome you home, where we will be together. You know where I am going and how to get there. May these words be a homecoming for us all. Amen."
Be honest, when Danielle said that Stephen Harper was speaking today, some of you had a brief moment of panic, didn't you? It's true. I get that. It's okay. I think we can move past that. We're continuing our Real Theology series today, as Danielle said. We're talking about Lion, obviously. I really need to say this just for me. This is going to spoil it for you. This spoilers alert. If you haven't seen the movie yet, do. It's really powerful. It's an amazing movie. So much so that when we were picking movies, I was certain that my movie was going to win the Academy Award for Best Picture. Apparently that was a thing that was going on at the Academy Awards this year, was people thought that their movie had won when it hadn't, but sadly mine did not win. When you think of home, what do you think of? Maybe it's a memory, maybe it's a place, maybe it's a person. For me, my biggest memories are always smells. And I think there's medical evidence that says that smells are attached to some of our most vivid memories. And two kind of stand out to me. It's bread, baking bread. When I was a child, my grandmother always was baking bread. And so when I'd come to her house, it would just be full of that smell. And to this day, whenever I smell bread baking, I think of her. My second kind of most powerful memory that's associated with smell is the fall leaves. Anybody else? For me, that takes me back to when I was in high school and playing football, and practices would always start. It would be a fall sports series that would start, and those leaves kind of bring back that notion, that memory for me. Well, the movie Lion is about a man, a boy. Half the movie is about his childhood, and half the movie is about when he's an adult, named Saru. And Saru is haunted by memories of a life that was lost to him. If you've seen the movie, bear with me, and if you haven't, let me paint you a picture. Saru was a child who was growing up in northern India with his family, his mother, his brother, and his sister. And they lived in impoverished conditions, a subsistence existence. His mother was a laborer who kind of broke rocks, it looks like, in her job. And Saru and his older brother, Gurdu, spent their time creatively solving the family's needs solutions, what they need for subsistence. They cleverly open up the scene with the two brothers jumping on a freight train that was hauling coal and packing up as much coal as they could carry and jumping off and going to sell it in the marketplace so they can get a couple bags of milk for their family. They were very poor, but they were happy. They were together. There was this incredible loving bonds that were established right away between the mother, the brother, and the sister. Well, one night, Gurdu, the older brother, had an opportunity to go and make some money hauling bales. And he said to his little brother, "You have to take care of your sister Shakila. It's okay, I'll be back." And Saru, who thought he was very mighty, it was revealed later on that his name means lion. We can see why. He's a very pretentious little boy. And he says, "No, I can lift anything. I can go. And he eventually wears his older brother down to the point where Gurdu relents and lets him go with him on this job that they can pick up some quick cash for the family. So they go to the neighboring town, they go to the train station to get ready, And the contact that Gurdu is going to meet with says, or Saru has to stay at the train station as Gurdu goes to meet with the contact that he's going to meet with. He says, stay here, it's okay. Saru's very tired at this point. He can barely keep his eyes open. He falls asleep on the train bench, sitting there on the platform. Wakes up hours later, his brother's nowhere to be found. His brother's last words to him were, stay here, I'll be right back. He wasn't back. As you can imagine, for any 5-year-old at that point in time, panic would set in as they kind of try to figure out where their brother is. And Saru is no different. He wakes up and he's panicked, he's frightened, and he's questioning where his brother is, and he wanders all around calling his name over and over and over again. He finds an abandoned train. He walks in and calls from there. Maybe Gurdu was in there. So he's wandering through the cars calling for his name. No answer. Finally, out of sheer fatigue, he falls asleep once again and wakes in the morning to what he finds is the abandoned train going very fast in a direction that was taking him away from his home. It's a very powerful scene as you see this helpless young child stuck on this train, calling, panicking, trying to get off. The train would come into train stations and he would hold the bars and scream to the people outside, help me, I'm stuck, help me. To no avail, the train would just keep going. And on and on and on it went, 1,600 kilometers away from where it started. It ends in Calcutta. And he gets off the train in Calcutta and he's obviously disorientated. I would be. Tara and I have been to India and we've been in Indian train stations. And even when you're an adult, keeping your faculties in those train stations and focus is a challenge, I can assure you. And so for a 5-year-old boy, I can only imagine the fear and panic that would have gripped him as he was so far away from home. Well, he lives on the streets of Calcutta for a while. A woman who is nice to him, who he thinks is an ally to him, brings him in and says, I've got somebody you can meet. As it turns out, she was setting him up to sell him into really some bad circumstances that I can only imagine would lend him into various abuses. He flees from that, gets away, and ends up in an orphanage in Calcutta. Not a great place to be, but better than where he was. The lady that runs the orphanage connects with Saru and says, look, we've put your picture in all the papers. 16 million people read this paper every day. Nobody has come forward. Nobody's looking for you. We have a very nice couple from Australia who wants to adopt you. And Saru is like, really? You didn't find my mom? Didn't find my brother? She says, no, I'm sorry, we didn't. So he goes to Australia, he goes to Tasmania with this couple and spends his life growing up in this loving, nurturing family. The first half of the movie is this journey of the child Saru to this place where he's adopted. The second half of the movie picks up on him as an adult. He's fully formed and functioning. He's thriving in Tasmania. He's just getting ready to go off to college. He has loving parents. He has a brother who he's quite affectionate for. All looks great, but under the surface, you can see something lurking. We're given flashes as Saru starts to have these memories of his past life, just little glimpses of India, just little glimpses of his mom. We see his mom's face every once in a while. We see his brother calling him and joking with him. It starts to, you can tell things are starting to work under the waves. Eventually, this is kind of brought forth. He goes off to college and he's meeting with the first-year students that he's going to school with, and they're all talking about where they're from. This is hotel management, so they're from all over the world. And they're just doing an icebreaker, getting ready to kind of launch into this course. Like, where are you from? I'm from, a couple of them were from India, and Saru comes around and says, well, where are you from? Australia. He said, no, I was born in Calcutta. And one of the Indians goes, oh, really, where? I have family in Calcutta. He says, well, I'm not really from Calcutta. I was adopted. And so you can see Saru starting to really struggle with this in earnest. A couple weeks pass, and that same group of friends has a party. It's hosted by the Indian couple who are in that group with him, and it's all Indian food. And when Saru was a little child, he was always bugging his brother Gardu to get him jalabis, which is, it's kind of like the closest we can come in our culture would be like mini donuts. He sees this all through the markets, and he's saying, I'll have 10,000. And his brother says, well, we got a lot of work to do to get you 10,000 jalabis. So, okay, 50. And so he's always wanting these. And in this moment, at this party, the Indian couple that had made this feast for all the friends, he walks into the kitchen to get himself another beer, and he sees a plate of jalabis, and he just loses it. You can see at a moment the flood of memories that come back to him, the flood of his sister, the love he had for his brother, the home that was lost to him was all of a sudden at the forefront. And for the first time, after his friends find him in the kitchen weeping, for the first time, he tells them his story. He hadn't verbalized it to this point. And he goes ahead and tells them where he was, what had happened to him, and all that he had gone through. Memories can be a powerful, powerful thing. Well, that journey starts to take him to a place where they say, well, his friend who was a former engineer talks about the fact that, well, you can just average out what trains in that era in the 80s in India traveled at, and then do concentric circles as far how far you went from that. And it all made sense. It was math. He said, and have you seen this new thing called Google Earth? It's amazing. And so you could do that, and you could find it on Google Earth. And Saru was like, well, okay. And as he's remembering these things, as he's processing this, it becomes more and more intense for him. And you can see Saru as he kind of grabs onto this. Yeah, maybe I can find my family. Maybe I can find my village, finally, this way. He begins to withdraw from his friends. He begins to withdraw from his family. He really closes in on himself. And you can see he gets tighter and tighter. And Dev Patel, the actor who portrays him, does a remarkable job on portraying this kind of inner turmoil, this inner obsession. At one point in his room, he has this Unabomber-like wall of all the trains and all the data he'd connected, and it's just madness. And you wonder if the character is maybe bordering on mental illness at this point in time, because he's so withdrawn. He's so into himself. He's withdrawn from his parents, his friends, his family. He's quit his job. The only thing he does now is look on Google Earth, where he finally finds his village. In an elated moment, he goes and talks to his mom and says, look, I didn't want to talk to you earlier. I found my village. I have to go. And she said, of course you have to go. It's only natural. So Saru gets on a plane and he goes to India, to this little village that he couldn't find for years and years and years because he didn't remember the name properly. And he finally found it on Google Earth. He goes to this village. He's wandering around. He's wandering the streets of his old village. He knows them. He's seen them in his mind so often that he can picture them. And he's wandering exactly right to his old house, which is now a stable. And he doesn't find his family. Well, he does find his family, just not there. He turns around kind of panicky. This was my house. He comes across a man who spoke English. He said, I'm Saru. This was my house. And he said, you're Saru? And he goes and finds Saru's mother. It's like the main street of the village. And it's like Bollywood almost. They're wandering down the main street in the village, and they're all in these very wonderful and colorful clothing. And his mom meets son cross that gap of about 50 meters, and their eyes connect, and they both know immediately who that person is. And you can see Saru, you can see Dev Patel, the actor, playing Saru at that moment. He had been tighter and tighter and tighter, and all of a sudden you can see him breathe. When we get home, when we experience home, that's one of the first things that happens to us, isn't it? We breathe. We might have come from a very stressful day. We might have been dealing with circumstances that are extraordinary in our lives, but when we get home, when we get to that safe place, we breathe. It's all that's right in our world at that moment that allows us to breathe. And Saru breathes as he's reunited with his mother. It's an amazing thing when we find home. The Bible speaks of home a lot. It starts out with a story about an action that separated mankind and God and called this divide between the two, and spends the rest of its time showing how God is calling humanity back into relationship, calling back home, calling humanity back home time and time again. But it goes more than being the corporate, like all of us calling us back home, but individually we hear that in the Bible as well. Jeremiah 1:5 talks about how God knew Jeremiah in the womb. In the New Testament it talks about, and John talks about this a lot, talks about the fact that God says he will never leave us or forsake us, that no one can separate us from the love of God. No one. In our scripture today, Jesus promises that, hey, I'm going to prepare a place for you, to prepare home. So God is with us in the beginning, through our journey to the end. He's with us in our home. And he gives us, to communicate this even more, wonderful communities like this, to communicate that level of being home in the here and now, to do great things like social justice together, to do great things like helping refugees together, to do great things like nurturing and nourishing week by week in this loving community. Tara and I have been at Hillhurst now for 6 years. We came in the summer of 2011. And when we moved back from the UK to Canada, a colleague at work knew that we were looking for a church, and he and his wife went here and said, look, I know you're looking, you should check out Hillhurst. We got a wonderful young minister. Now at the time, John was 52, so he was under the average age of a United Church minister, so I guess that's fair enough. And so we came to check it out that summer and walked in and saw the minister up here in shorts and socks and skateboarder shoes. I was like, wow, okay, this is the place for us. And we knew in an instant that we resonated with the values of radical hospitality and social justice and spirituality. We knew in an instant that this was home because we could breathe. And many of you have had similar experiences coming to Hillhurst. You've got to that place where you feel home, where you feel like you can be yourself. Tara and I often joke that we spent the first 6 months crying every Sunday as we kind of absorbed this and as God worked on us and kind of communicated that level of home to us in finding this place. Home can be a powerful thing. Home can help us to breathe. Home can help us have perspective on things. Saru found that in the movie. If you haven't seen it, do. I've seen it twice, and the second time was even better. We found that. We found that in our lives connecting to God. We found that in our lives here in this wonderful community, a place where we can breathe. We're going to wrap up a little bit differently than we usually do. I'm going to wrap up by having us do that. So in a minute, I'm going to ask you to close your eyes, and we're going to take 3 deep breaths. We're going to inhale and we're going to exhale. Are you ready? All right. Let's close our eyes. We're going to breathe in and out. And in and out. And one last time. In and out. You are loved, you are forgiven, and you're set free. Welcome home. Amen.
Peace. Let's sing. Let's sing. If you're moved to stand, let's sing.